My grandson filmed me falling off a stepladder in my own garage, posted it that same night with the caption, "Watch Grandpa eat it." And by the time I found out, the video had 11 million views. He never asked me. He never told me. And by the time I finally understood what he had built out of my worst, most humiliating moments, he had made $5 million off 31 secret videos of me. But here is what my grandson did not understand about the old man he was filming. I spent 37 years as a high school principal. 37 years of teenagers sitting across my desk, lying to my face, and I learned every stage of it, every move, every tear. So when my grandson finally made his biggest, most public move against me, I saw it coming 4 days before he made it. I told my attorney exactly what he would do, almost word for word. 4 days later, she called me back and asked how on earth I had known. And at the very end of all this, I made that boy stand in front of his 4 million subscribers and read one single sentence out loud. A sentence I wrote. Stay with me, because you are going to hear that sentence, word for word, and when you do, I think you will understand why they say you should never, ever go to war with a retired school principal. If this story makes you angry the way it still makes me angry, I would love to know where you are watching from. Put your city in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like mine matter to you, please consider subscribing so you do not miss what comes next. A quick note before we begin. Some names and details in this story have been changed to protect the people involved. I called it my life, taken from me one humiliating clip at a time, without my knowledge, without my consent, and without a single cent of what it eventually earned him. My name is Harold Whitcomb. Most people in Millbrook, Ohio call me Hal. I am 65 years old, and for 37 years I was the principal of Millbrook High School, a job I loved with a stubbornness that outlasted 3 different superintendents, who each, in their turn, tried to convince me it was time to retire sooner than I was ready to. Before that, and alongside it for over 2 decades, I directed the choir at First Lutheran Church downtown, standing in front of 40 voices every Sunday morning, coaxing something beautiful out of accountants and farmers and teenagers who would rather have been anywhere else, the way I had been coaxing something out of difficult teenagers in my day job for almost 4 decades. Now, I told you my career matters to this story, and here is exactly how. When you spend 37 years behind a principal's desk, you receive an education no university offers. You learn how a caught teenager operates. And I promise you it never varies. There are 3 stages, and I have watched thousands of young people move through them in exactly the same order, the way water always finds the same crack. Stage 1, minimize. It's not that deep. It's not a big thing. Everybody does it. Stage 2, deflect. Why are you only looking? This is really about you overreacting. And stage 3, the one only the truly cornered ever reach, perform. The tears, the trembling voice, the sudden, well-timed discovery of deep feelings, aimed not at the person they hurt, but at whatever audience holds the power to save them. I could not tell you the capital of every state anymore, but I can spot stage 3 from across a football field in the rain. Remember those 3 stages. You are going to watch my own grandson walk through every single one of them, in order, in front of millions of people. And my entire fight came down to the fact that I recognized the staircase before he reached the top of it. I want you to understand something about reputation too, before I tell you the rest, because it matters more than almost anything else in this story. In a town the size of Millbrook, population just under 6,000, a man who has run the high school for 37 years and directed the church choir for 23 does not have a private life in the way people in larger places imagine privacy working. Every student I ever disciplined grew up and had children who came through the same hallways. Every choir member's family has sat in a pew listening to me lead them through a hymn. My reputation was not vain. It was the entire structure my remaining years were built on. The thing that let me walk into the diner on Main Street and be greeted by name by 3 separate tables. The thing that let me stand up in front of a congregation every week and be trusted with something as intimate as their voices raised together. Keep that in mind when we get to the worst week of this story, because that structure is going to be tested by 11 million laughing strangers, and what happens to it will surprise. It certainly surprised me. My wife Doris passed 4 years ago, a stroke that took her within 2 days, fast enough that I am grateful most days that she did not linger the way her own mother had. Doris had been the church organist for 19 years before her hands grew too unsteady to keep up with it, and she used to sit in the front pew every Sunday afterward, mouthing the words to whatever hymn I had chosen that week. Watching me lead the choir with an expression of quiet pride, I still catch myself looking for, out of habit, every time I raise my hands to bring in the sopranos. After she was gone, my daughter Marcy, who lives 20 minutes away in the next town over, started checking in more often, and her son, my grandson Tyler, then 20 years old, started coming by the house on weekends, ostensibly to help me with yard work and small repairs, though I would eventually understand that his visits had a considerably different purpose than either of us initially let on. Tyler had always been, even as a boy, the grandchild I worried about most, not because he was troubled exactly, but because he seemed to need attention in a way his older sister never had, performing for whoever was in the room, restless whenever he was not the center of something. Doris used to say gently that he would find his footing eventually, that some children simply take longer to discover what actually matters to them. And I believed her, the way I believed most things Doris told me about our grandchildren, because she had a patience with young people I had spent 37 years professionally trying and often failing to match myself. I have wondered many nights since what Doris would have noticed that I missed. She had a way of catching the small wrong note in a person the way she used to catch it in a hymn, one flat voice in 40. I like to think she would have caught this one early. I like to think a lot of things about Doris on the nights I cannot sleep. Tyler had, for as long as I had known him as an adult, been restless in the particular way young men sometimes are when the traditional path, college, a steady job, a career built slowly over decades the way mine had been, seems increasingly unavailable or unappealing to them. He had dropped out of community college after 3 semesters, worked briefly at an auto parts store, and by the time he started showing up at my house most Saturdays, he was telling anyone who asked that he was building something online, a phrase vague enough that none of us in the family pressed him much further on what exactly that meant. I remember specifically a Thanksgiving dinner about a year before any of this came to light, Tyler mentioning at the table that he had quit the auto parts job to focus full-time on his online work, and my son-in-law Greg, Marcy's husband, asking, not unreasonably, how exactly that paid the bills. Tyler laughed it off, said something about diversified revenue streams and building an audience first, monetization later, language that sounded, at the time, like the kind of thing every young person seemed to be saying about the internet those days, vague enough that pressing further felt like exactly the sort of thing that would mark me as an out-of-touch old man who did not understand how the modern economy worked. I regret not pressing further. But I want you to notice something else about that dinner, something I only assembled much later, going back through my memory of it the way you go back through a hallway after a fire. Tyler's phone was on the table that entire meal, propped against the gravy boat, angled out at the table. At the time I thought nothing of it. Young people and their phones. It was only afterward, once I knew what I knew, that I went cold remembering it, and remembering how many other times, over how many months, that phone had been sitting somewhere just slightly odd, on a shelf in my garage, leaned against the sugar bowl in my kitchen, propped in the fence line while he raked my leaves. Always angled, always at me. I want to pause the story here because I think you deserve to form your own theory before I tell you the rest. A grandson who starts visiting his grieving grandfather more often, every weekend, helpful as can be, whose phone is always out, always propped, always angled just slightly differently than you'd expect from a young man texting a friend. What do you think Tyler was actually doing during those weekend visits, and for how long? Write your guess in the comments below, including how many months you think it went on, because the real number still makes my hands go cold, and I will tell you exactly how close you came. What it meant, I would eventually learn, was a channel called Fossil Fails, an account across 3 different platforms dedicated entirely to short, humiliating clips of elderly people struggling with everyday tasks, falling, forgetting things, fumbling with modern technology, all of it captioned with the same mocking, dismissive humor, all of it monetized through the platform's creator funds, brand sponsorships, and, eventually, a line of merchandise featuring the phrase "fossil fail" printed across cheap t-shirts sold to an audience of, by the time everything came to light, just over 4 million subscribers. I was one of his subjects. I had been one of his subjects. I would eventually calculate with Doris's old calendar and some careful cross-referencing, for the better part of 8 months before I ever found out. 8 months. Every Saturday I made that boy lunch. Every Saturday I thanked. Every Saturday, somewhere in my house or my yard, a phone was watching me, waiting patiently for me to stumble. The stepladder video was not the first. It was simply the first one that reached me, forwarded by a former student of mine, a woman named Jenny Kowalczyk, class of 1998, now in her 40s with children of her own, who sent it to me over social media with a message that read, "Mr. Whitcomb, I don't know if you've seen this, but I thought. Remember Jenny Kowalczyk? She only appears twice in this story, once here at the very beginning of the nightmare, and once much later, at the exact moment the nightmare turned around, and I have thanked God for her on both occasions. I watched it in my kitchen, standing at the counter, my hands going cold as I recognized my own garage, my own stepladder, my own voice, edited with a jarring sound effect every time I wobbled, a laugh track dubbed in over my genuine, private struggle to reach a box of Doris's old Christmas decorations on a shelf I had climbed to 100 times without incident. That is worth repeating, by the way. The box I was reaching for, in the video 11 million strangers laughed at, was my dead wife's Christmas ornaments. The caption, "Watch Grandpa Eat It," sat above 11 million views, 400,000 likes, and a comment section filled with strangers making jokes about my age, my balance, my visible, obvious vulnerability in a moment I had never once imagined would be witnessed by anyone beyond myself. I scrolled through the account's other videos that same evening, my stomach growing tighter with each one. There I was, filmed through a cracked doorway, struggling to understand a new streaming remote Tyler himself had bought me as a Christmas gift 2 months earlier. The video edited to make my confusion look considerably more severe than it actually was, cutting away my genuine questions, and leaving only my frustrated mutterings. Caption: "Grandpa can't handle 2024. Sit with that detail for a moment the way I had to. He bought me the gift. He bought the confusing gadget, wrapped it, put it under my tree, watched me open it, and then filmed the confusion he had purchased and planted, the way a man might stock a pond so he can film himself catching fish. That was the moment I stopped believing any of this had been casual or thoughtless. Thoughtless boys do not manufacture their grandfather's failures in advance. That is production. There I was again, filmed from across the church parking lot, missing a step on the way into choir practice. A moment of simple, ordinary clumsiness stretched and slowed and set to comedic music, captioned "choir director" or "stunt double." Remember that parking lot. This story is going to end in that exact parking lot, and I promise the ending is better than the beginning. And then I found the one I still cannot fully describe without stopping. There I was, filmed through my own kitchen window from my own backyard, sitting alone at my table on what I recognized, with a fresh wave of nausea, as the anniversary of Doris's death, my head in my hands. A private moment of grief. Tyler had captioned Grandpa having a moment, lol, followed by a laughing emoji. I sat with that particular video longest of all. Of everything I found that night, that was the one that made me physically ill. The realization that even my grief, even the rawest, most private moment of loss I had experienced since Doris died, had been considered fair material, filmed through a window, packaged with a joke, and released to millions of strangers for entertainment. There were, in total, across 8 months, 31 separate videos of me. None filmed with my knowledge, all of them monetized. All of them presenting a version of myself I did not recognize and had certainly never agreed to become. If you guessed 8 months in the comments earlier, go collect your prize, which is the same cold feeling I have every time I say the number out loud. I called Tyler that same night. He did not answer. I called Marcy instead, my voice, I am told, shaking badly enough that she thought something medical had happened to me before I managed to explain what I had actually found. Marcy came over within 20 minutes, and we sat together at my kitchen table, the same table from the grief video, watching video after video, her face going through an entire spectrum of horror I recognized because I imagined mine had looked much the same an hour earlier. Dad, she kept saying, I had no idea. I swear to you I had no idea he was doing this. I believed her. I want to be clear about that from the beginning because it matters for everything that follows. She had, like me, simply believed her son was building something vague and online. The way an entire generation of parents have learned to accept explanations about internet careers, they do not fully understand rather than press for details that might reveal something uncomfortable underneath. Tyler finally called back the following morning, his voice carrying a breeziness that told me, immediately, that he had not yet understood the gravity of what I had discovered. "Hey, Grandpa, what's up?" he said, as though I might be calling about a leaky faucet. I asked him directly whether he had been filming me without my knowledge and posting the footage online for money. There was a pause, then a short, uncomfortable laugh. "Okay, so you found the channel," he said. "Look, it's not that deep, Grandpa. It's just content. Everybody does this kind of stuff now. It's not like I'm saying anything mean about you specifically, it's just, funny. People love that stuff, and there it was. Word for word. It's not that deep. Everybody does it. 37 years behind a desk, and I could have mouthed those sentences along with him. Stage 1, minimize. I remember standing in my kitchen, phone to my ear, feeling two things at once, a grandfather's heartbreak and a principal's terrible, familiar clarity. Because I knew the moment I heard stage 1, exactly what was coming if I kept pressing. I knew the staircase. And God help me, I knew how it ended at stage 3 with a performance. What I did not know yet was how big the stage was going to be. I asked him how much money he had made from those funny moments. Another pause, longer this time. "I mean, the channel's done pretty well overall," he said, his voice growing noticeably more guarded. "That's not really the point, though." I told him it was very much the point and asked him again directly for a specific number. He would not give me one that morning. It would take my attorney 3 months and a formal discovery process to finally produce the actual figure. A number that, when I finally saw it typed out on a financial disclosure document, made me sit down hard in a chair in my own living room and stay there for a long time without speaking. Across creator fund payments, brand sponsorship deals with 3 separate companies eager to reach an audience that found humiliating elderly people entertaining, and merchandise sales of shirts bearing a phrase built directly from footage of my own private struggles. Tyler had earned, Over roughly 14 months of running the account, just under $5 million. $5 million. Built substantially on 31 videos of a man who had spent 37 years trying to teach teenagers dignity and respect, humiliated repeatedly, without consent, for an audience of millions who would never know my name, my career, or one true thing about me beyond the caricature Tyler had constructed and sold. I did not sleep much that first week. I stopped attending choir practice, telling the associate director I was dealing with a family matter, unable to face the possibility that members of my own congregation had seen those videos, had watched their choir director reduced to a punchline circulating among millions of strangers. I found out 3 days later that several of them had. A choir member named Ruth Callahan, gentle as always, mentioned it carefully during a phone call checking in on me. "Hal," she said, "I saw one of those videos my granddaughter showed me. I just want you to know none of us think any less of you. We know that's not really you." I appreciated her kindness. I also understood, hearing her say it, that a version of me now existed in the world, circulating among millions of people that I had no control over whatsoever. If you have ever had a false version of yourself loose in the world, in gossip, in a small town rumor, in a family story that got twisted in the retelling, then you know the specific helplessness I am describing, and you know it does not require 11 million views to hurt. Put the word "same" in the comments if you know that feeling. I suspect there are more of us in this comments section than anyone would guess. I want to pause here and acknowledge something honestly, because these stories are only worth telling if the teller admits his own mistakes too. My first suspicion, in that terrible first week, did not stay on Tyler alone. I wondered whether Marcy had known considerably more than she let on, whether a mother living 20 minutes away could genuinely have remained unaware of her own son's finances and online activity for over a year. I did not voice it directly, but it colored several of our conversations, a coolness in my responses that she noticed, and to her credit, did not push back against, giving me space to work through it rather than defending herself immediately. What corrected that suspicion was something I found almost by accident, going through old text messages on my own phone looking for something else entirely. A thread from 4 months earlier in which Marcy had asked Tyler, apropos of nothing, whether everything was okay financially, since she had noticed him driving a considerably newer car than an entry-level online marketing salary. The vague description he had apparently been feeding her should have afforded. His response, which I read with my stomach sinking, was dismissive, deflecting, almost identical in tone to what he had given me on the phone. "It's complicated, Mom. Don't worry about it. I've got a good thing going." Marcy had not known. She had, like me, been quietly, skillfully pushed away from asking questions by a son who had grown expert at deflecting exactly this kind of scrutiny from both of us. I stopped directing any part of my anger toward my daughter that day, and I am glad I did quickly, because in the weeks ahead, I was going to need her standing beside me more than I could yet imagine. I hired an attorney the following week, a sharp, careful woman named Rebecca Ostrowski, who had handled several media and privacy cases out of her small practice in Columbus, recommended by a former school board colleague, who remembered her work on a similar case involving unauthorized use of a teacher's classroom footage. Her office was tucked above a bookstore near the university, case files stacked with a precision I found immediately reassuring, and she listened to the entire account without interrupting once, taking notes in a neat, economical hand. The 31 videos, the 11 million views on the stepladder clip alone, the planted Christmas remote, the grief video through the kitchen window. When I finished, She sat back and told me plainly that what had happened touched several distinct legal issues: unauthorized commercial use of my likeness, invasion of privacy given that videos had been filmed inside my own home, and potentially deceptive editing that misrepresented actual events in ways that could support a defamation claim. "This is not a small case, Mr. Whitcomb," she said. "Ohio's right of publicity statute gives you real standing, and the scale of the monetization makes potential damages considerably more significant than most cases like this ever involve." Then I asked her the question I had been circling for a week, the question I want to put to you as well, because I suspect this comment section will split right down the middle on it. I asked her whether I actually wanted to sue my own grandson. Before I tell you what I decided, I want you to answer for yourself, honestly, one word in the comments: sue or family. Would you take your own grandchild to court over this? $5 million, 31 videos, your dead wife's ornaments, your grief through a window? Or would you keep it inside the family and try to reach the boy some other way? Sue or family? Go ahead. I will wait. And I will tell you this much now, whichever word you typed. There was a moment in the following month when I would have typed the other one. Rebecca did not answer the question for me. She told me only that I had every right to decide what accountability looked like: a lawsuit, a negotiated settlement, or simply a demand that the content come down. But that whatever I decided, I needed to move quickly, because content like this, left unaddressed, compounds rather than resolves. So I decided that week on a first step short of war. Rebecca sent Tyler a formal cease and desist letter demanding immediate removal of all 31 videos, along with a request for complete financial disclosure related to their monetization. A door, opened politely, with a clear path back to being a family on the other side of it. And this is where my 37 years behind a desk earned their pension. Rebecca called me the day the letter was delivered, to talk through what she expected. She said, one of two responses: silence while he found a lawyer, or quiet compliance. I told her respectfully that she was going to get neither. "I have met this young man 10,000 times," I told her. "He has already done stage 1 on the phone with me. It's not that deep, everybody does it. Your letter is going to push him straight past stage 2 because deflecting privately doesn't work on lawyers. So he is going to go directly to stage 3. And Rebecca, he is not going to perform for us or for a judge. He is going to perform for the only audience that has ever mattered to him, the 4 million people who pay his bills. He will sit down in front of a good camera, better lighting than he ever wasted on me, and he will cry, and he will find a way to make himself the victim. And because the fastest way to make yourself the victim of an old man is to attack the old man's mind, he is going to tell those 4 million people, without quite using the word, that I am going senile." There was a long pause on the line. Then Rebecca said gently, "The way you talk to a client who has been under stress, Mr. Whitcomb, that would be extraordinarily foolish of him. It would hand us a defamation claim tied in a bow. Most people wouldn't do that, most people." But I did not spend my career with most people. I spent it with cornered 20-year-olds. And a cornered 20-year-old does not calculate legal exposure. He calculates applause. 4 days later, my phone rang at 7 in the morning. It was Rebecca. Her first words were, "Mr. Whitcomb, I owe you an apology, and I need you to not watch it alone." He had posted it the night before. I watched it anyway, of course, alone at my kitchen table, because some things a man has to take standing in his own house. Tyler sat in a professionally lit setup, considerably more polished than any phone footage of me. A soft box light visible in the reflection of his eyes. A microphone clipped carefully to his shirt. Every detail of preparation entirely at odds with the spontaneous, tearful sincerity he was performing. He told his 4 million subscribers, with practiced sadness, that his grandfather was going through some cognitive changes lately, becoming increasingly paranoid and confused about things that had happened. and that unfortunately, some family members were now trying to weaponize that confusion into a legal dispute, which was deeply painful, he said, given how much he loved his grandfather and how hard this situation was for the whole family. He paused at one point to wipe at his eyes, a gesture so precisely timed that I found myself, absurdly, grading it, the way I graded 10,000 performances of remorse across a desk. It was, I will grant him, excellent stagecraft. Doris always said he needed to be the center of something. Well, here he was, he never used the word dementia. He did not need to. The implication sat in every chosen phrase, cognitive changes, increasingly confused, weaponizing his condition, and the comment section filled within hours with strangers expressing sympathy for Tyler, criticizing unnamed greedy family members, an inversion so complete that I sat watching it accumulate views with a horror sharper than anything the stepladder video had produced. By evening, the video had over 2 million views of its own. Strangers who had never met me were constructing a story in which I was a confused old man being exploited by my own family, rather than the actual victim of 14 months of secret filming. And underneath the horror, I will confess to you one small, cold, steadying satisfaction. He had done exactly what I said he would do, in exactly the order I said he would do it. The staircase never changes, and a man who can see the staircase can build a trap on the top step. Rebecca, to her enormous credit, wasted no time on her own surprise. "This is actually good for us," she said, "as strange as that sounds right now. He just made a specific, public, false claim about your cognitive state on a platform with millions of viewers. We can get a formal medical evaluation on record refuting it within days. I saw my physician, Dr. Anand Patel, 3 days later. Full cognitive assessment, every test they had." He wrote a detailed letter confirming what we both knew. No signs whatsoever of cognitive decline, memory, judgment, and reasoning entirely intact, any suggestion otherwise without medical basis. That letter, alongside Tyler's own video making the claim publicly, permanently, in high definition, with good lighting he paid for himself, became the centerpiece of everything that followed. My grandson had spent 14 months filming evidence against me. In 19 minutes of performing, he filmed the single best piece of evidence against himself. There is a lesson in that for every young person holding a camera, and I promise you we are coming back to it. The weeks that followed were, in their own way, the hardest of the entire ordeal, not because anything dramatic happened, but because the town itself had become a place where I could not walk into the diner without wondering who had seen which video, who was extending sympathy, because they genuinely felt for me, and who was quietly wondering whether Tyler's claims about my mind carried some truth after all. That is the particular poison of a lie like his. It does not need to be believed to do damage. It only needs to be considered. I watched people consider it, over coffee cups, across pews in the pause before they said good morning, and every one of those pauses took something out of me. I stopped going to the diner for 2 weeks. I am not proud of that. 65 years old, 37 of them spent teaching young people to hold their heads up, and a 20-year-old with a soft box light had me eating breakfast alone at my kitchen table, the same table from the grief video, wondering whether the structure of my whole remaining life, that reputation I told you about at the beginning, was actually going to hold. Here is what I did not know. While I was eating those quiet breakfasts, the town was making up its mind. And then Jenny Kowalczyk, class of 1998, the same former student who had first warned me, appeared for the second time in this story. Ruth Callahan called me on a Tuesday evening, and there was something in her voice I had not heard in weeks, something bright. "Hal," she said, "have you looked at the internet today?" I told her honestly that I had been avoiding the internet the way you avoid a road where you've had an accident. "Look," she said, "not at his page, at yours." Jenny, it turned out, had watched the crying video, recognized every manipulative beat of it. She is a middle school teacher herself. She told me later, and stage 3 is stage 3 at any age, and had gotten angry in the productive way. She had posted publicly a photograph from 1998 of me standing beside her at graduation, and underneath it, a few hundred words about the principal who had noticed a quiet girl from a struggling farm family, who had helped her chase a scholarship nobody in her house believed she could get, who had stood in the parking lot in the rain arguing with her father for 45 minutes about why his daughter needed to go to college. And she ended it with, "Pass it on," and Millbrook passed it on. By that weekend, there were hundreds of them. Former students across 4 decades posting their own photographs, their own stories under those same 4 words, the real Mr. Whitcomb. The boy I suspended in 1989, who wrote that the suspension came with 3 follow-up conversations and a job reference 2 years later, and that the reference mattered more. The girl whose family lost their house in 2004, who wrote about finding an envelope of grocery store gift cards in her locker every month for a year, and only decades later working out where they came from. Choir members posted recordings. A retired county sheriff, a man I had disciplined as a sophomore for something I will let him tell in his own version, wrote simply, "I became a lawman partly because Hal Whitcomb was the first man who ever held me accountable." The local paper ran a story about the whole phenomenon, a town refusing to let an algorithm rewrite one of its own. Somebody printed T-shirts, because apparently everything becomes a T-shirt eventually, except these ones said the real Mr. Whitcomb, and the proceeds went to the choir's roof fund. And I own 3 of them, and I am not ashamed to tell you I wore one to the diner the morning I finally went back. I want to be careful and honest here, because these stories. The counter wave was never 11 million views. It was a few hundred posts in one small town newspaper. It could not, reach the millions of strangers still laughing somewhere at Watch Grandpa Eat It. But I learned something that week that I want every person my age watching this to write down and keep. Reputation does not live on the internet. It never did. It lives in the people standing directly in front of you, the ones who actually watched you live your years, and when it is real, when it was built the slow way, it turns out to be load-bearing in a way no caption can crack. 11 million strangers laughed at 90 seconds of me. 6,000 neighbors answered with 40 years of me. I know now which number is bigger. Ruth and several choir members organized what they called, gently, a prayer circle during that stretch, though I understood it as considerably more than that. 6 or 7 people making sure I did not spend too many evenings alone, taking turns with dinners, sitting with me on the porch. Ruth herself came nearly every Tuesday, always with the same excuse about a recipe she wanted my opinion on, though we both understood the recipe was a formality. And my old colleague Frank Delgado, a retired mathematics teacher who worked 2 doors down from my office for over 2 decades, showed up most evenings with a chessboard and an insistence on beating me at least once before he would leave. Frank had a particular gift, which I appreciated more than ever during those weeks, for discussing something as absurd and painful as a viral humiliation with the same calm, analytical patience he used to bring to explaining quadratic equations to bored 16-year-olds, breaking the catastrophe into manageable pieces. Every man going through a war needs one friend who refuses to treat it as anything more than a story problem. Frank was mine. The mediation took place in Rebecca's Columbus office on a Thursday morning in October. Tyler arrived with his own attorney, a young man named Bryce Halloran who specialized, according to his firm's website, in creator economy legal matters, and who opened proceedings by arguing that the videos constituted fair commentary on aging and family life, protected content no different from countless creators documenting their own families online. Documenting. I sat beside Rebecca and watched my grandson across the table while his lawyer described a hidden phone in my dead wife's kitchen window as documentation. And Tyler would not meet my eyes, glancing at his folder, at his attorney, at the window, anywhere but at the grandfather he had spent 14 months quietly farming. Rebecca's response began with Dr. Patel's letter placed on the table, followed by a printed transcript of Tyler's own crying video. The key phrases highlighted in yellow: cognitive changes, increasingly confused, weaponizing his condition. She read each highlighted phrase aloud, slowly, letting the words sit in the quiet of that conference room. Mr. Halloran, she said, your client made a specific, public, false medical claim about my client's cognitive state on a platform with 4 million subscribers, timed precisely to undermine a legitimate legal claim. That is not commentary. That is defamation, compounding a substantial privacy and publicity violation. Then, one by one, she laid down printouts of all 31 captions, and beside them, the sponsorship agreements her discovery request had produced. 3 companies who had paid, in writing, to have their products featured in content explicitly marketed as elderly humiliation. Bryce Halloran's expression changed considerably as he skimmed those agreements, and he glanced at his client with the look of a man recalculating his fee against his conscience. And Tyler, cornered in a conference room with no camera to save him, did the only thing he knew. He ran the staircase one more time, all 3 stages, right there in front of us. It's being blown out of proportion, he said first. It was comedy. Nobody was supposed to take it seriously. Minimize. Then the platform pushes that kind of content. The algorithm rewards it. If it wasn't me, it would have been somebody else filming somebody's grandpa. Deflect. And then he turned, not to me, but to his mother, and his voice did the thing, the practiced catch. The wet eyes. Mom, you know me. You know I'd never actually want to hurt. He did not get to finish stage 3. Marcy stood up. Tyler, she said, and her voice cut through that room in a way I had never heard from my careful, measured daughter in her entire life. You told 4 million people your grandfather has dementia. You made it up. You made it up to protect yourself, and you left it up, knowing people in his own church were looking at him differently because of it. And Tyler, God forgive me for saying this in front of lawyers, but I watched you rehearse crying in the bathroom mirror when you were 15, before you told us about the dent in the car. I know the performance, sweetheart. I have known it your whole life. And I am done applauding. Bryce Halloran asked for a recess. Tyler did not get one from his mother. She gathered her purse and told her own son that she loved him, that she would always love him, and that she could not sit across a table and watch him defend this for one more minute. He left with his attorney. Marcy stayed. She sat back down next to me, took my hand under the table the way she used to when she was 7 years old and thunderstorms came through, and we finished the day's business together. The channel came down entirely within days of that mediation. All 31 videos removed under threat of immediate litigation, though Rebecca was careful to note that removal alone did nothing to address the money already made across 14 months of views, sponsorships, and merchandise. Tyler did not speak to either of us for almost 2 months while the settlement negotiations continued through his attorney. A strange, suspended stretch where the immediate crisis had passed, but nothing resembling resolution had yet arrived. Marcy called me most evenings, and I could hear, underneath her steady voice, the particular exhaustion of a mother caught between grief for the son she felt she had lost and anger at the choices that son had made. The settlement that eventually emerged, 3 months after the mediation, required Tyler to pay me a substantial portion of the channel's total earnings, along with a binding agreement never to post footage of me again under any circumstances. And one more thing. A formal, public retraction of the dementia claim, distributed to the same platform audience that had seen the original, pinned, permanent, not buried. And here, at last, is the part I promised you at the very beginning. Bryce Halloran's first draft of that retraction was a masterpiece of the modern non-apology, and I want you to hear a little of it because you have all read 100 like it. I regret that some of my recent statements may have caused confusion or hurt within my family. Situations like these are complicated, and I am committed to healing and growth. May have caused confusion, growth. Not one fact admitted, not one lie named, a fog machine wearing a tie. Rebecca began drafting a response, and I asked her to stop. I told her that with respect, this particular document happened to fall inside my area of professional expertise. Because for 37 years, when a student at Millbrook High did something serious, the consequence was never only the suspension. The consequence was the statement, written by the student in their own hand, read aloud when it mattered, and rewritten as many times as it took until it contained no fog whatsoever. I had personally supervised the writing of thousands of them. I had rejected drafts for the phrase mistakes were made since before Tyler's mother was in my school. I told Rebecca, let the boy's lawyer negotiate the money. The sentence is mine. And so it happened that, 41 years after I made my first sophomore rewrite his first empty apology, I sat at my kitchen table, the same table, and wrote the sentence my grandson would read to 4 million subscribers as a binding condition of settlement. Rebecca fought for it word by word, and Halloran, to his credit, seemed to run out of enthusiasm for defending the fog. Here is the sentence, exactly as it was published, pinned to the top of what remained of that. My grandfather does not have dementia or any cognitive impairment. I made that claim publicly, knowing it was false, in order to protect myself from legitimate accountability for filming him without his consent for over a year and profiting from it. No confusion. No may have. No growth. Subject, verb, truth. When it went up, I read it 4 times, and I will not pretend to you that my eyes were dry, though I could not tell you even now which several feelings the tears. Somewhere, I believe, a few thousand of my former students read that sentence, recognized the handwriting underneath it, so to speak, and smiled. Jenny Kowalczyk commented on it with a single word, rewrite accepted. I laughed out loud, alone in my kitchen for the first time in months. 6 weeks after the settlement finalized, an envelope arrived in my mailbox, Tyler's handwriting on the front, the first direct communication from him in almost 5 months. Grandpa. I do not know how to write this letter, so I am going to write it badly and hope you read the whole thing anyway. He wrote that he had had a lot of time to think, mostly because everyone in his life had stopped talking to him long enough that thinking became the only thing left to do. He wrote about the stepladder video, the very first one, that he remembered the specific moment. He decided to post it instead of deleting it, because some part of him already knew how I would feel, and he told himself, my feelings did not matter as much as the views did. I wanted to be successful at something, he wrote, and this was the first thing that ever worked, and I got so focused on the number going up that I stopped letting myself think about what the number represented, which was you, over and over, at your most vulnerable, turned into a joke for strangers. He wrote that the dementia video was what he was most ashamed of, that he knew it was false when he said it, that he said it because he was scared, and it was the fastest way to make people feel sorry for him instead of angry at him. And near the end, he wrote one line that I have thought about more than all the rest. Writing that sentence, you made me publish, was the worst hour of my life, and I think it was supposed to be, and I think I finally understand why you made 3 generations of kids in this town do the same thing. I did not respond immediately. I sat with that letter almost 2 weeks, rereading it in the same kitchen chair where I had first watched the stepladder video, noticing how certain lines landed differently depending on the day. Some afternoons reading as genuine insight, Other afternoons, to my more skeptical mood, reading as one more carefully constructed piece of persuasive writing from a young man with a gift for audiences. So I called Frank Delgado one evening, read him the whole letter over the phone, and asked what he thought. He was quiet a long moment. "Hal," he said finally, "I taught mathematics for 31 years, and if there is one thing I know about people that young, it's that the ones who mean it don't need your answer right away. The ones performing sincerity get impatient. Give it time and grade what he does, not what he wrote. Frank Delgado, ladies and gentlemen." Still the smartest man 2 doors down. I called Tyler eventually on a Sunday evening after choir practice, my first Sunday back in front of those 40 voices, where Ruth and the whole congregation had welcomed me with a warmth that told me the structure had held, all of it, better than I had let myself believe during the worst of it. Tyler answered on the second ring, careful, uncertain. I told him I had read the letter. I told him I was not ready to trust him the way I once had, that trust does not return all at once the way it can disappear all at once, across 31 videos and one devastating lie about my own mind. I told him I believed his remorse was real, and that I also believed a young man capable of what he had done was someone who would rebuild trust the way my students always had to, slowly, deliberately, with actions graded over time. He accepted that without argument, and it was, I think, the first entirely honest, undefended thing he had said to me since the whole ordeal began. Using a portion of the settlement, I established the Whitcomb Dignity Fund, working with a media literacy nonprofit in Columbus to develop curriculum teaching young people about consent, exploitation, and the ethics of filming other people, particularly elderly relatives, for online content. Frank, delighted to have one more project to argue with me about over chess, sits on the advisory board alongside Rebecca, and, at my invitation, Marcy, who has become one of the fund's fiercest advocates, speaking at schools about exactly what happened inside our own family. The curriculum is built around 4 questions Frank insisted every lesson needed. Has this person actually agreed to be filmed? Do they understand how the footage will be used? Would they be comfortable knowing millions might see it? And would you be comfortable if someone did this to you? Simple questions, Frank said, sketching them on a napkin at my kitchen table. But questions an entire generation holding cameras was somehow never taught to ask before hitting record. The fund has reached almost 4,000 students across 11 schools in its first 6 months, and I have spoken twice now to auditoriums full of teenagers about all of it. At the second school during questions, a boy of about 16 stood up, phone in his hand, the way it is always in their hands, and asked me quietly whether I thought my grandson was a bad person or a normal person who did a bad thing because, he said, and the whole room went still, "I post stuff about my family sometimes and I never once asked anybody." I told him the truth. I told him the entire tragedy of my grandson is that he is a normal person, that the machine in your hand is built to turn normal people into performers first and grandsons second, and that the difference between him and a young man with nothing to be ashamed of came down to a question he never asked before pressing one button. That boy sat down and put his phone in his backpack. It is not nothing. 4,000 students in, I have learned it is never nothing. Tyler visits every few. Tentative, careful visits that bear little resemblance to those easy Saturday afternoons before everything happened. He no longer brings his phone out of his pocket in my presence at all. A small, deliberate gesture I notice every single time and have never once mentioned out loud, though I believe he knows I notice. Last month, for the first time, he asked if he could come to a Sunday service and hear the choir. He sat in the back pew rather than beside Marcy and Greg, and afterward he waited for me by my car, in the same church parking lot where one of those 31 videos was once filmed from a distance without my knowledge. The same parking lot. I told you we would end here. He stood by my car, no phone, hands in his pockets like a boy called to the office, and told me the choir sounded better than he remembered from when he was a kid being dragged along on Sunday. I told him that was likely true. 40 voices, properly directed, sound considerably better than they did a decade ago. The same, I told him, is true of an apology, and of a young man, provided both are given real time and rewritten as often as it takes. If there is one thing I want you to take from this, it is that the people who love you can still, under the right pressure, convince themselves that your dignity is a reasonable price for their success, especially when a screen sits between them and the human cost. Watch for the phone that comes out a little too often, propped a little too carefully. Ask what exactly your family members mean when they say they are building something online, and do not accept a vague answer because pressing further feels like it might mark you as out of touch. Out of touch is survivable. 8 months of secret filming is something else. And write things down, keep the messages, save the screenshots because when the performance starts, and if it ever comes to a fight, the performance will start. The quiet man with the documentation beats the loud one with the audience every single time. And here is the second, deeper lesson. Reputation, the kind built slowly over decades of showing up for the people directly in front of you, can survive even a viral, humiliating, deeply unfair moment before millions of strangers, as long as those people, the Ruths and Franks and Jennas of your own life, choose to stand up and answer for what they know to be true. 11 million strangers laughed at 90 seconds of me. My town answered with 40 years of me. Build the 40 years. It is the only algorithm that has never once been changed. If this story affected you, tell me in the comments. Did you type Sue or family back when I asked you? And has someone close to you ever convinced themselves that using you was somehow still a form of love? Your story might be exactly what someone else in these comments needs to read tonight. And if you want more stories like this one, please subscribe so you do not miss what I have to share next. Thank you for staying with me until the end. Protect your dignity fiercely. Ask hard questions about what your family is actually doing with their phones, and never let a stranger's laughter online convince you that your own worth is up for negotiation. A final note before you go. Certain names, locations, and identifying details in this story have been altered to protect the privacy of everyone involved. If you or someone you know has had their image or likeness used online without consent, please consult a qualified attorney directly.